Asta Jónsdóttir arrived in Bíldudalur on a slate-gray afternoon when the sea sat heavy as pewter and the mountains pinched the sky. She had taken a seasonal internship at the Icelandic Sea Monster Museum, a timber building that smelled of salt wool and old stories. Her uncle Einar Thorvaldsson, a fisherman with windburned cheeks and a laugh like an outboard motor, met her at the door with a cardboard package taped within an inch of its life. From Egilstadir, Einar said, palming a knife through the tape. Dredged up by a friend of a friend. Said it belongs with the monsters. Inside, nested in sheep's wool, lay a gold ring the color of frozen sunlight. It was simple, undecorated, and yet not simple at all. Strands of heather root brown and thin as hair threaded the metal, and beneath the roots the gold was scored with faint age-soft runes. Einar whistled. Looks like something from a saga. Asta lifted it. The roots shifted as if alive. The note says Lagarfljót, she read, found near the eastern shore below Hallormstadur. And look, there's a date, 2012, a video year. People said they filmed the worm then. She glanced toward the museum's dark hall, its dioramas of sea serpents and kelp-crusted skulls. Lagarfljót Sormarin. Her uncle shrugged. Worm or no worm, I don't like the way it looks at you. It isn't looking, Asta said, but she set the ring back into its wool with care, the hairs on her arms lifting. When the museum closed, she brought the package to her rented room above the harbor. She placed the ring by the window, where the last light shivered, and she slept to the tide's slow breath. At midnight, the room filled with a sound like wet pebbles being poured into a bowl. Asta woke to find the ring on her chest. Something small sat in the chair beside the bed legs, crossed grin too full of teeth. Moss grew from his shoulders like a shawl. His skin was the color of moonlit straw. His eyes were lamp-black and bright. Evening muse, lass, he said in Icelandic, that creaked like driftwood. You've got my ring. Who are you? Asta rasped, gripping the ring. Name's Cougar for now. Names slide off us when the snow slides off the hills. Yours sticks, he added cheerfully. Asta, star. He hopped down. He wore a vest stitched from fish skin seams puckered with salt. His boots looked like seal flippers, and his fingers were too long to be comforting. Goblin Asta guessed, then winced at her own boldness. In Iceland, folks used other words alfar troll landvettir. But the creature in her room had none of the lit grace of elves, nor the colossal gravity of trolls. He radiated mischief like heat. He bowed. Jotin Goblin Korn Kin Hordkin. We answer to many names and none of them polite. How did you get in? Cougar tipped his head toward the lock. The ring is a key. It opens what was never meant to close. And it is bound to me, as I am bound to it, as the worm is bound to the gold and the gold to the river. Old story. Long shadow. Asta sat up. Tell me the story. Cougar settled onto the window ledge. Outside, the harbor lights strung themselves like beads across the water. Once there was a girl near Lagarfljót. She put a heather worm atop a gold ring to make the gold grow. The worm did what worms do, it grew, and the gold grew with it, fat as a king's pride. She feared what she'd made and cast both into the lake. The worm swelled into saga and slept in a hoard of glittering want. That is one thread. Another my people bartered with the shiny things mortals loved. We kept hoards the way humans keep gardens tended and traded. But greed is a weed that climbs fences. The ring you clutch was the latch to a gate between our halls and the hoard under the lake. When the girl fed the worm with gold, the latch caught in the wrong place. Our halls cinched, our bargains bent. We turned. He pinched the moss at his shoulder, scattering crumbs. We went from keepers to keepers, turned keeled. We started hoarding the hoard. We sharpened our smiles. Some turned to stone by day if they had nothing left to bargain. Some got small and sly. I got small and sly. Asta breathed in the fish-salt air. And you want the ring back? I want the bargain set right, Cougar said, and for an instant the grin dropped, and she saw in his face an oldness that was not unkind. The worms, both of them, the heather worm that grew teeth and the lake worm that grew miles, twisted things. Mortals stoked the twist with want. We all did. He leaned forward. Help me carry the ring to Lagarfljót. Help me talk to the worm. We will rewrite the bargain. We will give back what needs giving. Your museum will have a story worth the price of a ferry ticket. Asta should have refused. But she had come to Bíldudalur to collect stories that smelled of fish guts and frost stories that bit. She looked at the ring. For a heartbeat in the gold surface, she saw a cold-eyed horse standing in black water. She blinked, and there was only her own pale face. When do we leave? She asked. Kugur's grin returned like a knife. Before dawn. Monsters don't like an early start. They're vain about their silhouettes. They set out in Einar's old Hilux while the mountains still wore the night like a hood. Asta left a note on the museum office door, collecting an oral history in the East Fjords. Back in a week. It wasn't untrue. Kugur wedged himself under a wool blanket on the passenger seat, smelling of wet lichen. They skirted the ragged coast, crossed bridges where the water raced white beneath, and stopped at a cafe where the barista didn't blink at a girl speaking to her blanket. Folk bring their creatures in all the time, she whispered, pouring coffee. Better to feed them or they pick your pockets. At Havamstangi, they turned inland fields ringed with round hay bales like moons fallen to earth. At Blonduos, snow sifted the air. Cougar dozed, waking only to press his palm to the window when they crossed rivers. Listen, he'd murmur. They keep secrets in their throats. By the time they reached Egilstadir, the sky had cleared. The aurora ran like wind-blown silk. Asta parked by the dark water of Lagarfljót. Its surface was starless, a strip of night laid onto the land. Long birch shadows ran down to meet it. Cougar hopped out, stretching. Smell that old gold and old want. Asta took the ring from her pocket. The heather roots trembling up its curve had greened in the cold air as if waking. We don't. Throw it in, do we? She asked. Not yet. Cougar's ears twitched. First we ask. Bargains are spoken things. And listen, the worm doesn't only swim. It is the water's long memory. Address it politely. The lake answered first with silence, then with a ripple that crossed its width with impossible speed. A hill of water rose and moved not toward the shore, but along it, traveling east, then west, the way seals patrol. Asta's breath misted. Cougar licked his finger and held it up as if tasting an invisible wind. And then hoofbeats. Not from land, from the water. From the river mouth where Jökla slid its river voice into the lake, a horse stepped onto the shallows as if the water were glass. It was beautiful in the way of knives, sleek gray eyes like iron filings, mane like rain. It looked at Asta. It tossed its head. It dipped its hoof to paw backward hoof. Nykur, Cougar said softly, "The lake has sent its doorman." The horse lowered itself to its knees and made a sound like invitation. The air grew full of a sweet, damp smell meadow at summer's height. Don't get on, Cougar added helpfully. Humans are a bite he likes to take home. Asta's grandmother had told her once, if you meet a strange horse by water, check its hooves and speak its name. Names set limits. Asta lifted her chin. I know you, she said in a voice that shook only a little. Nykur. 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 The horse flinched on the third naming. Its eyes narrowed, and she saw in their black a flicker like cold fire. Its circled skin twitching as if the name itched. Back, Kugur said, stepping in front of Asta. He drew something from his vest, a nail, old iron bent. He held it like a priest might hold a cross. We're here to bargain with the worm, not drown in the doorway. The Nykur stamped, sending up a fan of water like shattered glass. It turned its head toward the east, toward the track of ripples, where the lake's long back had just moved, and it snorted. Then it slipped under the surface without a sound. Asta let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Kugur pocketed the nail. Good girl, he said without affection, the way one speaks to a smart sheepdog. Now the lake knows you know its tricks. That matters. On the black water, the ripple returned and halted opposite them. The surface quivered. Something very old listened. They did not hear the worm so much as feel it in their bones, the way thunder speaks in cellars. The wood of the pier creaked as if remembering storms. The birches along the bank shook themselves and were still. You bring the latch, the lake said without saying. You bring the mistake. Why, Kugur stepped forward, chin lifted. To unmake the mistake. To loosen the latch and set the gate right. The gold you keep has a hunger that isn't yours, Lake Lord. Let it go. The ripples moved an old animal considering its muscles. I keep what falls to me. The girl cast greed and fear together. I keep both. The river is a throat. I hold the tongue. Asta moved to stand beside Kugur. The ring began the bargain, she said. A poor bargain. We've come to write the better one. Mortals and their better bargains, the lake shivered. You pour new water into old cups and are surprised when the taste does not change. Kugur spread his arms. His moss glittered in frost. Then let us change the cup. Silence again, a silence that stretched so taut, Asta imagined she could pluck it and hear a note. She thought of the museum in Bildudalur, the patient glass eyes of fish, and the careful captions beneath sketches of myths. She thought of tourists standing in front of dioramas wanting to be thrilled and reassured in the same breath. She thought of the ring's roots tightening around gold. If we fail, she said softly to the water that was listening, you can drown us and wear us like stories. But if we succeed, the gold will move as rivers should move. It will buy boats and books, roofs and soup. It will not sit in a dark pocket making monsters. The ripple sank. The water stilled. For a long time, nothing happened. And then what happened felt like a memory, being lifted from the bottom of a lake. Slow green with weed, heavy with silt. Come back at dawn, the lake said. And Asta understood it would think on the offer in the language of currents. It would consult its doorman. It would nose the ring with blind patience and read the runes with the touch a lake gives to stone. Dawn, then, Kugur said, and when they turned away, Asta felt the oddest sensation, the sense that something enormous had inclining its head in courtesy. They slept in the hilux on the shore road, Kugur curling small on the dash like a cat. Night moved. Dawn came up pale as milk. At first light, the lake wore a thin ice skin at the edges starred by stones. The air burned in Asta's lungs. She wrapped the ring in a square of Einar's old net and tied the corners. Kugur produced from somewhere a coil of line wicked with oils that smelled of pine and blood. He looped it through the net like a priest dressing an altar. Words matter, he said, but so do the things that carry them. They rowed a small, borrowed boat out from shore. Birch shadows followed like the fingers of a giant. Mid-lake Kugur set the ring bundle on the water, as if it were a loaf of bread. It floated impossibly. Asta put her fingertips to it. The lake was a mouth under her skin. Kugur spoke first words old and quarrelsome Icelandic with bones from sagas and spines from older syllables. He named the ring's first purpose binding, and the worm's second nature keeping, and the third thing that should come from their meeting releasing. Asta spoke next. She named places Bildudalur, where stories go when they want to be told. Egilstadir, where roads meet. Hallormstadur, where birch remembers being a forest. Jökla, where the river knows its own name. She named the people who would benefit, and the teeth that greed grew. She named Kugur small, sly, honest enough to tell you when he was lying. The lake lifted under the boat, the way a horse lifts its back under a saddle. The ring shivered in its net. The heather roots swarmed like eels and then lay still. Done, the lake said all at once decisively, the way a door sometimes decides to close on its own. The latch is loose. Kugur exhaled a laugh that sounded like relief dropped from a height. He reached for the ring. The Nykur exploded from the water on the boat's starboard like a blade being pulled from a sheath. Its teeth flashed. Its eyes were rimmed white like a frightened horse, and there, in the instant before it struck, Asta saw fear, not hunger. It lunged, not at them, but at the bundle, the gold. Kugur moved faster than any human could. He smashed the iron nail against the Nykur's forehead. The horse shrieked a cry like a kettle boiling dry. The boat lurched. Asta flung herself nearly overboard to hold the ring net to the water. Still, Kugur barked. It must stay touching the lake if it leaves the latch slips back. The Nykur thrashed, and Asta saw something ropey on its back, a twist of weeds. No, it was a strap made of hair and water, and along it stuck like burrs were the shadows of hands. She understood names, keep things to their shapes. Fear or worship warps them. The lake's doorman had been made a jailer by stories told wrong. She did the only thing she could think of. Nykur, she said, not a challenge this time, but a comfort. Nykur, you are a door horse, a threshold keeper, a fairy with hooves. You are not a thief. The horse stilled as if the word had broken a fever. Kugur breathed a word like a hinge releasing. The ring settled. The lake sighed. Changed, it said, soft and everywhere. The Nykur sank trembling. When its head went under, it was no longer gray as iron. For a heartbeat, it looked like river water given horse shape, brown, bright, full of sky. Kugur sagged. That he panted was the first attempt. Let's not botch the second. They beached the boat and stood shivering while the sun pulled itself higher. The ring in Asta's hand felt lighter, as if some weight had been persuaded to go home. Now, Kugur said, we ask the worm to move the gold. How, Asta asked. By telling it what will happen if it doesn't, Kugur said briskly. Not a threat consequence. Lakes understand consequence. So do worms. They returned to the pier. Asta cupped the ring and spoke. If the gold sits, it rots. Not with green or rust, but with hungry dreams. People will come with cameras and nets, with dynamite and faith. They will make you a roadside sign and a listicle. They will make you restless. If the gold moves, it will stop dreaming. It will turn into bread and heat and fences and a replaced propeller for Einar's boat. It will be an ordinary miracle. That is the best kind. Silence. Then a small thing on the far shore, a glint of something bright caught in reeds. On the near shore, something small rolled from the water and clicked against a stone, a coin fat with age stamped by a king whose name Asta did not know. Kugur crouched. He touched the coin like one touches a cheek. He did not pick it up. Easy, he whispered to the lake. Slowly. He looked at Asta. If it dumps the hoard all at once, men will come with shovels. If it lets it go like wildflowers in thaw, it will seed the villages along its length with good luck. Asta nodded. Then we'll make it a local legend. She could see it now, a small plaque at the museum the story told with a wink. From time to time, Lagarfljót returns what it never truly wanted. If you find something, buy coffee for a stranger and fix a fence. More glints in the reeds. A washerwoman once would have called it a fairy day, but this was Iceland, where elves are neighbors and stories keep house. Go the lake, said presently, the word walking in the ripples. Let me do what lakes do carry and remember. Return when the first snow becomes the last snow. Then we will speak of doors. Doors, Asta asked. Between our halls and yours, Kugur said. His grin flickered. Between how we are and how we were. The latch is loose, but a door without a frame is just a bad hole. They drove west along the ring road with the ring wrapped now not in net, but in black wool. In the highlands, a dusting of snow skated across the road like pages blown from a book. Kugur was quiet, and Asta did not disturb him. She had the feeling of having spoken too loudly in a church and being forgiven for it. In Ísafjörður, they bought hard fiskur and a thermos with a dented side. In Patreksfjörður, a woman with hands chapped by wind told Asta about her great-grandfather, who swore he had seen a serpent's back in Lagarfljót when he was a boy. He said it looked like the spine of an island, deciding whether to stand up. Back in Bíldudalur, the museum's old floorboards squeaked hello. Asta carried the ring to the storage room and set it in a glass-fronted drawer between a whale's ear bone and an iron hook that had pulled up more seaweed than cod. She put no label on it. Not yet. She wrote a new exhibit text in the office, her breath steaming the window. On the wall hung a map of Iceland, pricked with red pins, for sightings, a web of longing across the island's body. She told the story carefully, how a girl had made a bargain badly, how a worm had kept it too well, how a door had stuck and would soon move easier. She added a note. If you ever find something shining in a reed bed near the lake, buy coffee for a stranger and fix a fence. When she finished, Kugur climbed onto the desk and read the words upside down. You've made us sound almost decent. You helped, Asta said. He wrinkled his nose. Don't make a habit of saying so. Reputation is a currency. Einar banged in from the harbor, cheeks lit with wind. There you are, he said, and then stopped dead because Kugur was plainly standing on his niece's paperwork, wearing a vest of fish skin. Fishermen have a way of not seeing what they cannot easily explain, but Einar had loved bedtime stories as a boy. His eyes widened, then he bowed awkward and sincere. Welcome, he said to the goblin. Kugur perked. You see me. Most older mortals have traded their eyes for weather reports. Einar grinned. My eyes see what the nets don't catch. He looked at Asta. I don't know what you've been up to, but the cod came easier this morning. The sea was in a better mood. Asta thought of the coin winking against stone. Small miracles, she said. Word ran along the fjords the way a good rumor does. In a reed bed on a Tuesday, a schoolboy found a brooch shaped like a fish, cheap tourist tat from the 1980s, which he gave to his grandmother. She cried anyway and made pancakes. A farmer turned up a bent silver spoon in his field. He fixed his neighbor's fence with a length of chain he could have kept for himself, and slept sweeter. A volunteer crew in Egilstadir repaired the playground slide with the proceeds from a raffle fund that grew faster than anyone expected. Asta noticed these things because people told her. She had started a guest book next to the Serpent exhibit. Tell us your lake story. Some were tall tales and some outright lies. Some were serious, like the man who wrote in a careful hand, I do not drink when the water is still now. I listen. A woman from Reykjavik called for an interview. Asta talked about folklore as maps of fear and hope. She did not mention goblins or bargains or the ring. She did not need to. The shape of the story was enough. Kugur came and went like a draft in old houses. Sometimes she would find a pebble on her desk in a perfect oval outline or a smudge of moss where there should be none. Once she woke and saw him sitting on the railing outside her window, looking at the sea as if it were a letter he could not quite read. Do you miss your halls? She asked. My people miss the idea of ourselves, he said. We were never as good as the old songs say, and never as terrible as the new ones pretend. But it is difficult to be in between. Humans are good at in between. You live short and learn fast. Asta thought of Einar's hands thick with scars and the speed with which a storm changes a plan. We practice, she said. The winter went the way winters go, candles, soup stories told twice because they are worth the telling. When the last snow became the first, when a warm rain teased the ice from eaves and the birches tasted sap. Asta drove east again, with Kugur sitting openly in the passenger seat, nodding to sheep as if they were cousins. Lagarfljót lay black as ever, but the air around it felt less clenched. The Nykur watched them from the shallows, ears pricked, eyes no longer ringed with fear. It did not step into their path. It did not bow. It simply existed, horse-shaped water, and that was enough. They rode without hurry. The ring in its wool nest pulsed faintly against Asta's palm like a drowsy animal. Today we set the frame, Kugur said. A door is good, a frame is better. A door swings true only when it knows where to sit. The lake listened. This is our offer, Asta said. Twice a year at first snow and last snow, the door opens between your hoard-keeping and the goblins' bargaining, between your memory and our forgetting. On those days the ring is returned to you in touching, and we ask permission for what we take and tell you where we put it. We ask as keepers, not as thieves. We tally. We thank. If we break the rule, the latch turns again. If you break it, the door swells and we plane it until it fits. No more binding by accident, only on purpose. Kugur added voice bright and thin as ice singing on a pond. And in return we will do what we were meant to do, keep the balance of wanting. We will whisper to greedy men and make them misplace their keys. We will plant coins in places where good hands will find them. We will sit in museum rafters and tangle the hair of liars. We will scare children just enough to make them clever. We will be useful. The water lifted. The boat rose and fell. The aurora would have flickered approval had it been night. The birches signed their names in a language of branches and green. Agreed, said Lagarfljót, and the word went through Asta like warmth and through Kugur like a shiver. The Nykur snorted, which may have meant finally. Bargains, Kugur had warned, always have cost. The cost was small, but it was not nothing. The ring would never belong to Asta or to any human. It would be a key checked out from a stern librarian, used with respect, returned on time. If a mortal tried to keep it, their pockets would develop holes, their doors would refuse to latch, their bread would always burn at the edges. If a goblin tried to hoard it, the moss on their shoulders would die and not return. If the lake tried to swallow it entirely, the river would scatter the hoard into glittering confetti in a single day, and men with shovels would come to wound the shores. Fair Asta said. Einar had once told her there were only two kinds of fishermen, those who thought the sea owed them a living, and those who understood gratitude as a kind of navigation. The second cost was stranger. Once a year, Asta would have to tell a story badly on purpose so that people would argue with it, and by arguing, set it right. It keeps us honest, Cougar said, half smiling. We become the tale that improves when humans push back. It's a leash you hold on us with your wits. She agreed. She could think of a dozen silly ways to misplace a comma and let schoolchildren find it to say 30 when she meant 13 and enjoy the letters to the editor. The museum would thrive on such arguments. People would bring their own stories to correct hers. The exhibit would be a conversation. Paid, said the lake, which was not a word it used often, and Asta felt the bargain settle like a roof beam seated true. The first summer of the new bargain came with lupine like spilled paint, and tourists who wanted hot dogs and a photograph of the fog. The museum in Bíldudalur displayed an ordinary ring in an unlabeled drawer that staff sometimes forgot to close. Children pointed and asked, and docents told the story as if it were a recipe. On a night when the sky refused to get truly dark, Asta unlocked the museum and found Cougar in the rafters with two other goblins, smaller and larger than him, moss in different shades. They watched a couple from Akureyri argue amiably about whether the worm in the 2012 video had been a floating net or a moving creature. Cougar sighed, satisfied. They make our door. Asta leaned on the rail. You'll keep your side. We'll trip those who run too fast, the larger goblin said with a grin. We'll sit on the chests of sleeping men who think theft tastes sweet. We'll hide a found coin in the pocket of a woman who will know exactly what to do with it. We'll leave the Nykur a wreath of watermint, the smaller one chirped. He has a hard job. Asta made tea in the staff kitchen and poured some into a saucer for the goblins, because a saucer is a polite bowl for small old things. They drank with noisy pleasure. When she walked home along the harbor, she saw Einar sitting on a bollard mending a net. He looked up and nodded toward the far black. Sea's in a good mood, he said. Let's keep paying her in stories, Asta said. No good thing goes untested. Late autumn brought a man with fire in his eyes and a metal detector in his hand. He had read about coins turning up in reeds and saw not stories but a vein to mine. He watched the museum. He watched Asta. He followed her one morning when she and Cougar drove east with the ring swaddled in wool. He did not see Cougar. He saw only opportunity. At the lake, while Asta tied the boat, he moved from the birches like a fox and knocked her down into the loam. He wrenched the bag from her hand. He ran. Nykur Asta gasped. She had a mouthful of dirt and a heart full of fury. Nykur doorman, stop him! The water stiffened. The man's feet hit the shallows and kept going, but the surface turned to something like thick glass. He skidded. He flailed. He dropped the bag. It slid away from him like an eel. Cougar came out of nowhere and tripped him, a small joy he had been born to. The man fell to his knees and began to cry, which was not manipulation, but shock. Asta knelt beside him. Listen, she said, words clipped with cold. This ring is not a treasure. It is a door hinge. You do not steal a hinge. You oil it. He said. It felt like luck, like a story that could finally end well for me. It still can, she said more gently, but not like this. Return what isn't yours. Fix what you can. She helped him up. Cougar, whose heart was not large but was not small, either dropped a coin into the man's pocket, a dull thing with a bite taken out of it. Buy coffee for a stranger, he said gruffly. Start there. The man left limping and did not return. Asta set the ring on the lake as agreed. and the Nykur stood aside, tossing its head like a guard dog who has decided to trust the mailman. The lake said nothing, which was approval. In winter, Asta left a small chair at the museum's solstice party empty and plainly labeled for anyone who feels like a story with no seat. Sit if you are too shy to say hello. Sometimes a stranger sat there and wept a little. Sometimes a child sat there and described in impressive detail a monster they had made friends with, which looked suspiciously like a large dog. Cougar sat in it once, invisible to everyone but Asta and Einar, and ate 3 slices of kleinur and a piece of Lagarfljót in a way that was both greedy and grateful. "We keep our frames," he said. "We keep our doors." "Don't get too proud," the worm agreed, "because you spoke as if you had listened. Most folk don't." "I'll keep listening," Asta said. "You keep telling me when I get it wrong." Kugur's grin showed less teeth than usual. "Gladly." On a late spring day when the birches wore new green like gossip and the harbor shone tin bright, Asta found a box on the museum steps. Inside, on a bed of moss, lay a fish-skin vest stitched to her size. The seams were neat, and the smell of salt was clean. A note the size of a postage stamp said in crabbed letters, "For a keeper of better bargains. Wear when you cross rivers." She put it on the next time she rowed out on Lagarfljót. The water seemed to approve. The Nykur watched, chewing nothing, ears pricked. In the reeds, glints of small, ordinary good luck winked like minnows. The lake hummed a slow baritone in her bones that might have been the closest thing it had to a song. Asta published a pamphlet that mistakenly claimed the famous 2012 video had been recorded in 2013. People wrote in by the dozen, delighted to correct her. School children toured the museum armed with printouts and pencils. An old farmer smacked the glass case and laughed. "Got you," he said. "You did," Asta agreed, pen poised. "Now what will you add?" they added, and the door stood in its frame all the sturdier for their weight. Kugur brought her a dandelion gone to fluff and set it on the desk. "For humility," he said. "It's a weed," she replied. "It's a flower that won," he said. "Years fold into one another in places that keep their weather." Asta grew into her work like a tree into a boundary fence shaped and shaping. Einar fished and cursed and blessed. The museum became a place people stopped in storms because the stories inside were warmer than the air. Twice a year at first and last snows, Asta rode out with the ring and wool. Kugur or one of his kin went with her. Sometimes they spoke bargains. Sometimes they sat in companionable silence, while the lake, which would outlive them all, considered the angle of sunlight on water. The Nykur counted clouds. Once in late summer, a tour bus pulled up and disgorged 20 bright jackets. One of the visitors stood before the unlabeled drawer and stared. She had the look of someone who had been tall among tall buildings too long and had forgotten how to be small among mountains. She touched the glass lightly. "It feels like a promise," she said. "It is," Asta told her, "but the kind that keeps you honest." When Asta walked home that night, Kugur paced on the low stone wall. "You will die someday," he said matter-of-factly. "So will you," she said, just as matter-of-factly. He looked offended, then pleased. "Fair," he acknowledged. "When you do, we will tell your story badly once and then properly forever." "You'd better," she said. "Or I'll come back as a draft and tangle your hair." He bared his teeth in something that was not quite a grin and not one. Promise. In the end, Lagarfljót kept what lakes keep, a record of footsteps across winters, the taste of iron in spring, floods, the lowing of cattle that once came to drink when birch was more than a memory. It kept old gold and let some go. It kept secrets and let some change shape into stories that did not cut hands when handled. The Nykur kept the doorway and learned to relish a job done without the taste of panic. The goblins kept their bargains and mischief in equal measure, growing neither saintly nor monstrous, but something usable, a pressure against the lid of greed. Asta kept a key, she did not own a hinge, she oiling with words and weather. When she retired, younger hands took up the wool-wrapped weight and found it good. If you go to Bildudalur, the museum will still smell of salt and wool. A guide may tell you a story about a ring with heather roots and a lake that learned the difference between keeping and hoarding. If you drive east and stand at Lagarfljót, when the light goes thin, you might see a ripple that is not wind. You might hear hoofbeats from nowhere and resist the sweet smell of summer on water. You might say a name 3 times, not to command, but to be clear. If you find a coin in the reeds, do what Asta told everyone to do, buy coffee for a stranger and fix a fence. Doors swing best when the hinges are oiled on both sides. And if a small figure with moss on his shoulders sits on a railing at dusk and grins with too many teeth, nod to him as you would to any neighbor. Ask after his halls. Tell him a story a little badly. Listen while he corrects you. Because in Iceland, where the land remembers and the sea remarks, the best bargains are the ones that make everyone a little more careful and a little more kind. Lakes and worms, horses and goblins, fishermen and museum keepers, and the travelers who come to hear a monster story and leave with a better one beside it.